All right, we're live and no one is here yet, but for the people who are trickling in, if you could just tell me if you can hear me, give me a thumbs up, a 1 or 2 in the chat if you can't hear me, because these are yet again I have brand new headphones, so I'm not sure if I'm coming through. So the people who are here, if you could just give me either a yay or nay. Okay, thanks, Nate. Okay, that's good. Otherwise, I would have just been blathering like a buffoon for the next 10 minutes to an audience of several. Hi, Christine. Hi, warrior woman, or good day, mate, as they say in Oz. Okay, so today I just want to make a short video. I always say that videos don't want to wind up being that short, usually, about Joe Biden. And he recently, in another bit of pandering, the Democratic Party, the DNC, let him out of his self-contained isolation unit. And they let him go out and speak to people, which is unfortunate if you're seeking to defeat Donald Trump. But he came out, and I love the fact that this is an aside, but I love the fact that the only Aussie emoji they have is a koala. For some reason on YouTube, they don't have wallabies or emojis of the Sydney Opera House. The only, the only thing they have is koalas, which I guess I don't know. Is that unique to Australia or? But yeah, glad you're here. Kangaroos, that's another good one. Oh, they do. Do they have kangaroos? I've looked for. I don't know. Maybe I have to be more diligent about searching the emojis because I haven't seen the kangaroo emoji. But that makes sense. Uh, oh, your iPhone. Okay, yeah. So on laptops, I usually do YouTube on laptops, and they don't have it. And it's I have an Android, so it's probably not on my phone either. But uh, that's good that it's at least Apple is on the ball here. But anyway, they released him from captivity, and he made a speech to a Muslim political action committee saying that Islam, he, and I'm not going to quote directly, but he essentially said Islam should be taught in schools because it's one of the great confessional faiths. Now, I don't know if even Joe Biden understands what he means by confessional faiths. And again, you could say the same thing about a lot of words that come out of Joe Biden's mouth. But um, he was raised a Roman Catholic, I believe, so he might have been speaking in those terms. But usually, at least he didn't say it's one of the great Abrahamic faiths, because what most people who are ignorant of Islam, when they talk about Islam, and they refer to it as an Abrahamic faith, which is very misleading. For those of you who actually read the Quran, Abraham is described in multiple chapters, but mainly in the surah called the Prophets, and it basically inverts the story of Abraham, which starts in the Bible in Genesis 12 and then continues through several chapters. And what the Quran does, it kind of twists it around, and it turns Abraham basically into a pagan. What the compilers of the Quran did was essentially retcon Muhammad back into this pseudo-biblical narrative, what they thought of as the story of Abraham. So in the Quran, he's called Ibrahim, and he talks to a bunch of fellow pagans, and Abraham did come from Ur, and his father, his family made icons, pagan idols that were worshipped. So he came from a pagan family. But what Muhammad does, instead of relating the actual story of Abraham, who was called out by God and chosen to be the first among his elect people, and to travel to the land of Canaan, which would become the land promised to Israel. So what Muhammad does is kind of flip that around, or rather, what the Quran does is flip that around and turn Abraham, or the character described as Ibrahim, into a proto-Muhammad. So Abraham takes these idols and he destroys most of them, but he takes one idol and tells all of his fellow pagans to worship that idol. So what's essentially happening there is Muhammad is commanding his fellow pagans to practice this form of monolatry. So you have them worshiping this one idol, and of course, the idol described is Allah. So instead of Abraham, the patriarch Abraham, the father of faith, who was called away from pagan worship and chosen to follow the one true God, you have a version of Abraham that essentially becomes proto-Muhammad, which is basically worshiping one specific idol, which is still an idol and still not representative of God, the true God. And that is the genesis of Islam, the Islamic worldview. And this is why Muslims believe that Ibrahim created the Kaaba, even though there's no documentation that this site existed during the times of the patriarchs, that this was an important trading route or significant in any way, even though there's no archaeological or historical evidence to verify this. Muslims believe that Abraham, their version of Abraham, created the Kaaba, and that's why they go around throwing stones or throwing pebbles at the Kaaba. They circumambulate the Kaaba and do something that resembles a pagan practice, because it's essentially steeped in paganism, although the Quran puts this quasi-biblical patina on what's essentially a pagan practice. I mean, the Kaaba was a place of pagan worship where people worshipped many gods, even though by the time of Muhammad, Allah had become the preeminent God. So that's basically that's the story of Islam in a nutshell. So when Biden says that they should teach Islam, I agree, they should teach Islam, but they should teach things like that. They should relate accurate information about this religion. They should. What you have now is people being taught lies about Islam. They're taught that it's a monotheistic faith, which it's not. Again, At best, you could describe the practice of Islam as monolatry. At the very best, that's the best spin you could put on it. Even though it has polytheistic practices that were adopted from the Sabians, like you have pagan practices like the stoning of the Kaaba, even core doctrines like the pillars, the 5 pillars of faith, the Salat. These are things that were adopted from pagan practitioners of different pagan, local pagan, pre-Islamic Arabic faiths. Hi, Richard. So I mean, if you're teaching them the truth of Islam, I would agree they should be taught that. The problem is they're not taught. They're taught premeditated lies. They're being consciously deceived. So they're taught that Islam is a monotheistic faith, which it's not, and you can discern that simply by reading the Quran for yourself. They're taught that Muhammad was a peaceful man, which he obviously was not. He was an Arab warlord, and Islam itself, the genesis of Islam is essentially as a looting party. Now, Muslims will tell you that Islam existed for millennia. It existed since the dawn of time, which contradicts, again, like other Islamic beliefs, it's self-contradictory because they say Islam has existed since Adam. But in the Quran, it says Muhammad was the first to worship Allah. So it existed since Adam, and Abraham was the first Muslim, but then it says Muhammad was the first Muslim. So make up your mind. So even if you rely on Islamic texts, Islam is false. So they teach that Muhammad was a peacemaker. He was not. He was an Arab warlord. And like I said, the genesis of Islam was as a looting party. It was essentially a religion adopted in order to give an imprimatur of I don't know. I guess you could say it was adopted in order to give an imprimatur of justice to evil acts of plunder. So it was essentially a looting party, a religion and a religion that a looting party masquerading as a sincere religious faith. And it reminds me, in a sense, if you leave out the warfare and the terrorism, it's very similar to Scientology. Now, Scientology was developed by L. Ron Hubbard, another cult leader. It was developed in order to essentially evade taxes. So L. Ron Hubbard was in hock to the government. He owed the IRS millions of dollars. So he decided to create something called Dianetics. And most of you are probably familiar with the book Dianetics. I actually tried reading Dianetics once, and I did not even get through 1 or 2 pages. It's actually worse. If you can believe it, it's actually less readable than the Quran, which is an accomplishment in itself. But L. Ron Hubbard created Dianetics and then the Church of Scientology in order to become a tax-exempt organization. So he created it basically to evade taxes. The goal was to make money from all of these overly credulous people seeking some form of spirituality. And hi, Alejandro. And that was the goal, just to make money. And he used this pseudo-religious, pseudo-spiritual doctrine. He created that in order to funnel money into his coffers, which he did up until I think 1981 or 1982. I forget the actual day that he died. Scientologists have this bizarre belief that L. Ron Hubbard is not really dead. I can't. Um, for those for those of you who are actually interested in this, this is a bit of a tangent, but there's a great book by Lawrence Wright called "Going Clear." This was later made into a much less interesting movie by a British director, Alex Gibney, which I haven't seen, but I've read the book, and the book is oh, you can go, Christine. I'll thanks for coming. The book is actually very fascinating. The Lawrence Wright book. He's a great author. He's the one who wrote The Looming Tower, about the conspiracy to the 9/11 conspiracy. But the Going Clear is a great book because it examines Scientology from front to back. And one of the great things, there's a little aside he writes, and Lawrence Wright is a great author, but there's this little aside which is kind of a crack at psychotherapy, where he basically says the psychiatric community turned against L. Ron Hubbard not because they were concerned for the welfare of their patients or potential people who might be exposed to his pseudoscientific gobbledygook, but they were concerned about him kind of horning in on their territory. So, like his e-meters and all of these ridiculous pseudoscientific nonsense. Psychiatrists, psychotherapists were worried, or particularly talk therapists were worried that he would cut into their business, which I think it's amusing that he has that in the book. But going back to my original point, Scientology, it has a lot of similarities to Scientology in the sense that you have what's essentially a desire to defraud people and to make money. In this case, for Mohammed, who wanted to engage in his perversions, to collect wives and sex slaves and make a lot of money, not just him, but his companions, Abu Bakr, Umar, all of the four quote unquote rightly guided caliphs. You have this desire to just basically be able to engage in sinful behavior and plunder and be covetous and justify it. So they create a religion to do that. It's kind of like how Scientology was created by L. Ron Hubbard as a kind of like a mask in order to engage in robbery. Yeah, Scientology is ridiculous, but the thing is, no one, unless you're an actual Scientologist, most people aren't going to dispute that Scientology is ridiculous. Like, even if you can, even if there are people, and I mean, even I'll admit this much, like the psychiatric community, the psychotherapy, there's a lot of valid complaints. I wouldn't rely solely on Tom Cruise, or the Church of Scientology to make that, but there are a lot of valid complaints about the underlying nature of psychotherapy and over medication. So, like, yeah, you have some people who agree with that, but no one is disputing the fact that Scientology is just a fraudulent, ridiculous cult. The thing is, Islam is a much larger cult. It has a lot more wealth. It can actually exert its influence to muzzle people, to silence people, both legally, but also exercising influence so that critiques of Islam are not published. But even more drastically, they can just outright kill or murder people who are critics. And yet Islam is exposed to much less scorn, at least in elite circles, than Scientology is. Like if Joe Biden had gone to what is the name of that Scientology castle in Florida? I think it's in Pensacola somewhere. But that we where one of the novitiates for their religion actually died, and they were sued. But that's where you get things like Xenu.net or Operation Clambake. But if Joe Biden had gone down there and said, well, Scientology is one of the great confessional faiths, and it should be taught in school, people would. I mean, even the bootlickers in the media and Biden and the people at Pod Save America, like even these ridiculous people would probably, at the very least, express skepticism. Would ask publicly, like, what is Joe Biden doing? Why is he endorsing Scientology? But the thing is, he can do the same thing for Islam, which is just as absurd in its foundational tenets, and much more dangerous, to be quite honest. And yet, no one is batting an eye, which is sad. Anyway, that is my take on the Biden pay on to Islam. Like I said, I think Islam should be taught in schools, but students should learn the truth, not propaganda, which is unfortunately what most of them do learn. I think that's one of the good things to come out of COVID. These Marxist teachers, Ed for Red, or Red for Ed, these Marxist teachers who are threatening not to come back, I would say, good on you. We don't want you back. Like, I think students are actually learning a lot more outside of these indoctrination centers than they would inside. And I say that as someone who graduated college at the turn of the century, so I have not been inside of a school in a long time. Yeah, that's the thing. Is Islam, just because of numbers, people don't learn logic and logical fallacies, things like argumentum ad populum. They don't realize that that's a fallacy. Hi, Kathy. The fact that they say there's a billion, that's highly inflated, especially when you consider how many Muslim sects are considered heretical and how many non-believers in Islam there are who don't admit it because they're afraid of being killed or ostracized. So it's much less than a billion, but let's concede that you have hundreds of millions. So you have hundreds and hundreds of millions of ostensibly devout Muslims, and people, because they don't understand logic, they haven't learned logic, they don't appreciate, they say, oh, there's a billion people who believe in this thing, therefore it must have some credibility. But they don't actually examine, they don't push themselves a little bit further to actually look at the core, the foundational documents of texts of Islam, and ask themselves, well, maybe these are a billion people, or hundreds of millions of people who believe in it because they've been marinating in this since they were little kids, and they've never questioned it, and they've never asked themselves, they've never exposed themselves to doubts about. They've never actually looked. They've never read the Quran. They've certainly, even if these people have read the Quran in their own language, they have never read the Hadith. They've never read Sahih Bukhari or Sahih Muslim or Sunan Abu Majid. They've never read the Sirah. They don't actually understand what Muhammad's life was like. So they just look at it and say, oh, there's a billion people that like this, therefore it must be good. Or at least it must have some credibility. It can't be completely without basis in fact. But unfortunately, that's as far as their reasoning goes. And a lot of people do that. Even it doesn't even have to be with Islam, although the consequences of that are very dire. But things like the National Health Service. If you're in the UK, the NHS has only been around for approximately 70 years or so. Um, it's only been around for 70 years or so. But the vast majority of the British public, and this is not just liberals, it's not just socialists, it's conservatives too. Most English people will defend the NHS to their dying breath. And when you ask them for substantive arguments like why is the NHS superior, like what's so great about the NHS, they'll resort to generalities or they'll say you're not compassionate, but they won't actually give you any evidence. So that's the same with a lot of things in life. People don't actually look at them critically. They don't apply logic to these situations. Oh, hi GW. And that's the main cause of a lot of our problems, particularly things like Islam. People are not looking at this critically, asking themselves why the why the people in power would be so uh, uh, why they would do so much to welcome this foreign religion, which doesn't seem to be that compatible with Western values. They don't really ask themselves these critical questions. They just go, "Oh, Islam. Our teachers or our politicians are saying Islam is great, therefore that must have some merit," which unfortunately is not the case. Anyway, I'm running a little long. Again, it's not a short video, as I said, as I promised. Sorry about that. But I'll keep this under a half hour, and I will talk to all of you next time. Bye.